Welcome to Unmasking Dementia Lived Experiences, a podcast featuring families who have navigated the challenges of dementia. Through heartfelt stories, we will delve into trials, triumphs, and wisdom gained along the way. My name is Christiana Egi. I'm a registered nurse, dementia advocate, children's author specializing in dementia education, memory care specialist, owner of reputable memory care facilities in Toronto, Canada, as well as the founder of a Roosevelt Grammar Wellness Hub, a charitable organization that caters to the needs of communities of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Welcome to Unmasking Dementia Lived Experiences. I'm thrilled to welcome back our dear friend, Joanne Chen Tandot. Tonight, we'll be discussing the challenges of responsive behaviors in dementia. This may include actions, words, or gestures that are exhibited by someone with dementia in response to something negative, or a frustrating experience, or even confusion in their environment. Some of the common examples of responsive behaviors include aggression, agitation, wandering, and restlessness, among others. Joanne Chen Tandok is a brain health specialist with over 20 years of experience in dementia care, research, and education. She holds advanced degrees in human development, psychology, and applied neuroscience. A former psychologist in the Philippines, Joanne helped establish one of the country's first memory clinics before moving to Canada, where she has educated and supported communities and professionals on dementia care. As a caregiver for her grandmother with dementia, she is passionate about prevention, caregiver wellness, and promoting healthy aging through a holistic approach. Welcome back, Joanne, to Omas.
Thank you. Thank you, Christiana. Happy to be back.
Okay, so this is an interesting topic for tonight because this is a topic that causes a lot of stress amongst both family and professional caregivers when your resident is experiencing responsive behaviors, right?
Yep.
So I want you to explain to us what it means. What does responsive behaviors mean?
Okay, so we'll start with that. So, responsive behaviors are more commonly known by the general public as challenging behaviors or difficult behaviors. In the scientific world, it's more formally called the behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia. So if I were to summarize or give us a concise definition, these are like your observable actions, your the person's expressions, their reactions exhibited by someone living with dementia that people around them, like their caregivers, the professionals, seem or feel that they're challenging, right? And that hence the term challenging behaviors. But here in Canada, I don't know if there are other countries, but like because we are trying to advocate a more person-centered approach. And in the person-centered framework, we call it responsive behaviors because we believe that behaviors have meaning. They are not like just done because the person wants to give their caregivers a hard time. So most of the time, as part of the dementia process, it's not just memory that's affected, but their ability to communicate as well. And when they have difficulties like expressing or articulating what they want or what they need, then sometimes they become these behaviors, these quote unquote challenging behaviors. But again, in a more person-centered light, we call them responsive behaviors, because we believe that when a person loses their ability to communicate, they resort to behaviors to communicate their need, right? And hence the term.
So every behavior has a meaning, right?
Yes.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, what is the person trying to tell you? It may not be in
Mm-hmm.
the way that you like it, but they are expressing something.
Yes,
So what are
exactly.
the common causes of responsive behaviors, please?
So like again, in the context of dementia, okay, but
Yes. Yes.
because like everyone has behaviors, okay,
Oh,
not just people with dementia, but we're limiting our discussion to like
dementia.
dementia, right? So, first, dementia, these are the symptoms, but they are caused by different diseases. So the most common cause is Alzheimer's.
Mm.
Now, for a lot of you, maybe you're familiar with Alzheimer's, and we know that Alzheimer's involve changes in the brain. Right?
Mhm.
So that's one, okay, possible cause of the responsive behaviors because of those, the difficulty in how the brain cells communicate because of the disease, the brain shrinkage, all those can contribute to the dementia process. But we're not limiting ourselves to just biological causes or the neurological causes. Otherwise, we'll just say, oh, there's nothing we can do because it's a progressive disease. And so we're saying that other than biological causes, other common causes of responsive behaviors could be unmet needs, right? So if, for example, the person is hungry, they feel hot, they are overstimulated, but they cannot communicate it, or maybe they have a need, they want to like be a part of something, that once was important to them, but because of the dementia, they could no longer, be part of it, right? So that's an unmet need. So that's another possible cause. And what else? Maybe how they're being treated by their caregivers or the people around them. That can also be a reason why there are responsive behaviors. There are environmental causes, like for example, let's say the room is, yeah, noisy, or it's too cold or too hot. So there are many, many, many possible causes for
Yeah.
responsive behaviors, but
Like,
those are the main things that come to mind right now.
okay, like discomfort,
Yeah,
hunger,
discomfort.
pain,
True, true.
yeah, things like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yep.
Wonderful. So, what approaches can caregivers use to identify underlying causes of responsive behaviors?
Yeah, so in my work before, and even now sometimes when I do some like dementia care consultancy, a big thing for me that I usually like encourage caregivers to regularly do is to document behaviors, even though like they're not professional caregivers, because I know in when you're a nurse, or you're part of you're a professional caregiver, you're required to document. But even caregivers, I feel one approach is to be in the habit of documenting. When I say documenting, there's what we call the ABC approach. Like you document the antecedent, meaning what happened before the behavior, and then B means behaviors, like you describe the behavior in detail, what happened, right? And then C is for the consequence, like what happened after the behavior. In doing so, the a caregiver can analyze patterns. And when you analyze patterns, then you are more able to, predict, prepare, in advance, and minimize future behaviors. So that's one approach that I usually encourage. The second thing is, be person-centered. And when we say be person-centered, that is assessing or knowing the person, right? First, before their dementia, and then like right now, assessing, different factors in their life and trying to meet their holistic need. That's a common approach that I would advise to help address responsive behaviors.
Okay, can you give examples? For instance, like a behavior is happening.
Okay,
Yeah,
so let's think about a common behavior. Let's say a person is restless at 3 o'clock,
yeah,
right? People call it sundowning.
right,
Okay. So now, if I were a caregiver, right? At first, if you notice the first time, right, you would be puzzled, what's happening. But if you're in the habit of documenting, oh, 3 o'clock, and then go into what this person, what did they do when they were healthy, when they were younger. Maybe you go back to their history. Let's say that person used to be a mother who a housewife, a mother who picks up their kids at 3 o'clock, right? And so once they know or they feel it's 3 o'clock, or maybe they see in the window that there are kids, maybe they're starting to be, oh, I need to go pick up my kids. And now, usually the causes interplay. So you look at the life history, you look at the disease process. So in dementia, usually they have difficulty with recent memories, but their remote memories usually are intact. So maybe in their brains, oh, my daughter is still a 6-year-old kindergarten or grade 1 kid that I need to pick up, not realizing that their daughter is now a full grown woman, right? so
right.
so that interplays with their intellectual, right?
Mhm.
And then other factors, maybe the person is hungry, or maybe she thinks her daughter is hungry. So it's there's no like fixed, but this is just an example that came to my mind, but there's
Yeah,
no recipe. But in terms of what I'm trying to arrive at is, if you know the person, if you know the history, and you look at different aspects of their life, their physical, their intellectual abilities, their capabilities, their life histories, if you put them all together, then more likely then you can find a solution to that. So maybe if that's the person, that's the behavior you're trying to address. So if you know that she is a mother who maybe wants to pick up their daughter from school, and you're the daughter and you're seeing that, that, instead of saying, hey mom, I'm here, I'm already 40 years old, you don't need to like pick me up from school, right? You can validate, which is again another person-centered communication tool. So you can say, Mom, I see you're looking out the window and you want to pick up your daughter. Like, but instead of like stopping her, or instead of maybe bringing her, because validation doesn't mean you have to agree, but it's more just like being with the person. So you can just say, oh, can you tell me about your daughter? Can you tell me about what do you like about picking her up from school? That's also a way you distract them. Okay.
mhm,
But remember, in managing responsive behaviors, you don't begin with distraction, because oftentimes caregivers, I'm not generalizing, but in my work experience, they always start with distraction. Like they're restless, they give them food, they give them,
mhm,
something fun, like a tablet or something, but without really first identifying what caused or what's triggering the behavior, right? And so, like, I'm not against redirection or distraction, but first, what's important is we go back to the person, try to think what may be triggering, try to find solutions for what's there, and use person-centered communication, like validation, before we redirect.
okay. So that brings me to the next question, which is, how can caregivers improve their communication
Mm.
to better understand the person they are caring for and how to respond to their behaviors?
Mm-hmm. So like there's so many communication tips that I can give you, and when you see one person with dementia, they say you only see one person, right?
Yeah.
So, and that again, is where assessment comes in. You don't just like use all the tips that you know, but you assess the person, because like there's some people, for example, with dementia who can still understand very well, but they cannot communicate, and some people who cannot communicate but they can understand. So like it's more like understanding the person. But here are general tips, right? So if you are working with people with dementia, okay, just like anyone else, the most important, the first thing is to get their attention. And how you get their attention is by, looking at them in the eye, talking to them ideally face to face, calling them by name, okay? And then when you talk to them, you speak clearly, you speak simply, you maximize the nonverbal communication, your how you talk. You also look at their nonverbal, speak in short sentences, and use a calming, reassuring tone, right? Like, because again, like we tend to, let's say, for example, in the midst of a responsive or an escalating behavior, we are also like being carried away by the emotion being displayed by the person, and hence sometimes we like also like raise our voices, right? And so like in short, we have to like train our brains to like first calm ourselves, and like speak gently, like those are the basic communication tips for communicating with them in order to address or respond to responsive behaviors. And of course, listening, right? Listening actively. And again, that includes like you validate them if needed. You don't contradict them, but you connect with them. So those are, some simple tips that hopefully could help.
Okay. So what are some of the challenges responsive behaviors present to caregivers?
I think the responsive behaviors have, big impacts, not just to the individual, but also to the caregiver. So the first one I can think of is emotional stress, right? So if there's responsive behaviors, the caregiver would tend to be frustrated, or they might feel helpless, you know, or maybe they will feel guilty. Did I do something wrong? Was I the one who triggered this behavior? They might also feel exhausted or fatigued, right? Especially if the behaviors are persistent, right? There's also a feeling of grief. There's a term in dementia care called ambiguous loss, where like when they see that their parent, for example, with dementia is no longer acting the way they used to, or when they're not recognized by their parent, for example, like they feel that even though the parent is still alive, they already feel that the person is gone, right? So that's ambiguous loss or anticipatory grief. Another thing that I think is a challenge brought by responsive behaviors to caregivers is the physical strain, right? It can be tiring. There's a risk for injury. For example, if let's say the person tends to like hit, right? There's a high risk for injury for caregivers, and of course exhaustion, right? There's also maybe financial costs. I think that's a challenge because some caregivers would have to like give up their jobs, right? Or concentrate more with their loved one, and of course that takes not just money but also time and energies. That's very demanding of them. Their routines get disrupted. Maybe they would have limited downtime, right? And it just there's a downward spiral, where it can also impact their mental health, right? Because of all the stress, the anxiety, they might feel burnt out, and they might feel socially isolated too, right? So, those are the things that I feel, are a challenge because of, the responsive behaviors.
I find that this is the aspect where caregivers, both family caregivers and professional caregivers, have a hard time, especially when that person is in early stages of the disease, right? So someone is still able to have lucid moments, right?
Mm,
And then the next minute they're cussing you out and stuff. It's so hard for people
yeah.
to understand. I've heard
Mm-hmm.
family members say, even some, some professional caregivers, depending on the level of professionalism, it's like, oh, they know what they are doing. They're just putting it on. So
Mm-hmm.
that is a very delicate time where, because they're lucid, they're not, and stuff. And so that is where, at least for the professionals, they're able to move on and continue to care for them because, I mean, that's their job. But for
Mm-hmm.
families, it's hard to forgive. It's like, you hit me, the next time I'm going to hit you back.
Mm-hmm.
Don't talk to me like that. And they start talking back or fighting back. This is
Yeah.
such a delicate time in the dementia process, whether
Yeah.
Alzheimer's or vascular, whatever it is, the disease that is causing it. So what would you say to people listening to this podcast out there? How do you deal with this part of the disease where, you sort of feel they know what they are doing, but they don't really know because they're going through a disease process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so again, dementia is a complex disease,
It is.
and responsive behaviors that go with it are also complex. It's not a one size fits all. But what I can say for, like in your example, first I feel that family caregivers also need to educate themselves. So the more educated, the more understanding you have about the disease, then the more understanding you can be of the person.
Mhm.
I always tell professional and family caregivers I worked with that when you see responsive behaviors, don't take it personally. Think of it as the disease talking, not the person, right? And you might wonder why, there are moments when they seem to be okay, lucid, and then there are times that they're, cursing. Again, it's part of the disease process. Sometimes those neurons misfire, and it's different. It's when a person has dementia, it's not always downhill. There are, good days, there are bad days, so you have to understand that. And I also think, many of the reasons why caregivers also feel, react the way you described it is, again, because we care so much, right, for our families, in that when emotions are involved, and like when you are a professional caregiver, sometimes you still can distance yourself. But
Mhm.
when you are a family caregiver, emotions are involved. And when it's involved, the more you tend to, react more negatively, right? Because when your emotions are the ones that's driving your behavior, sometimes you can't think clearly, right?
Yeah.
And that is why it really requires awareness about the disease, awareness about yourself, in order for you to first also manage yourself, manage how you communicate, right? How you deal with your loved one who lives with dementia, right? And those are, baby steps. Those are the first steps that you can do, right? But again, it's a journey. It's something that we learn, as we go along. And that also where support comes in, right? Because like, yes, you can have all the education you want, right? You can have all the awareness and the control that you want, but again, we're human beings. If we're tired, if we are sick ourselves, if we don't meet our own needs, right, then the more we are easily like we
Okay.
easily
Mhm.
become more impatient, right? We easily lose control. And so it's all a balance about, knowing and also taking care of ourselves.
Yeah, because these are really stressful times for caregivers.
Mm-hmm.
What can they do to maintain their own well-being while, facing these challenges and the struggles that responsive behaviors pose to them?
Mm-hmm. So as I mentioned, first is yung education and training. I have a bias for that because I'm an educator. But also, I feel that they really need to prioritize self-care. And how do they do that? They reach out to their support networks, right? Don't assume that because other people know that you're caregiving for someone, that they need your help. Sometimes you need to like really verbalize that I need your support, right? You can also like join, support groups. You can get counseling because you need to like vent, you need to air out whatever, emotional baggage you have. You also have to find respite care, like even if it's just for a few minutes, like, that you have to get that short-term relief and recharge. Yeah, like those are the things that I think are, key to maintain your own mental health and well-being as you care for someone with responsive behaviors.
Yeah, a couple of things I just want to add. Like, while it is really hard for some caregivers to seek help, it's also very difficult for some caregivers to get help, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is where, like, I often say, all hands on board is the best way to approach dementia care. So not just that
Mm-hmm.
family, because dementia does not only just affect the individual or the
Yes.
family, but it's a community disease. If we
Mm-hmm.
can all be more educated, or if we can all have increased awareness of this disease, and we all start to extend our help to people that are going through this journey, it will be
Mm-hmm.
really helpful for that family. As a matter of fact, I was talking to a lady recently from the Purple Vine, and she was a three-time caregiver for mother, father, and mother-in-law. What she
Mm-hmm.
said, now she's a dementia advocate, educator, speaker, author. What she said that really resonated with me is this. As a caregiver, when you are in this dementia journey, get a little card or notebook and write down the type of help you need, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when a friend or family member say, what can I do for you? She said, give them that list. Say, what can you do on this list? Sadly, she says, put down meals, put down, different tasks. So,
Yes.
because most of us don't know how to ask for help, or when people
Mm-hmm.
ask, we don't know, but I think that's such a good idea.
Yeah, it's very wise. It's
Yeah,
practical. Yeah.
write it down and
Mm-hmm.
to them. Maybe say, oh, so if you see meals on that card, but even if you're not a cook, how about you order in for them one day?
Mm-hmm.
It's like Uber Eats or something, right? Or that
Yeah.
pizza
Yeah.
so that you give that caregiver a break. Or like
Yes.
I often say, why don't you visit your neighbor and say, you know what? I'll sit with grandma or I'll sit with mom or dad. Why don't you go for a half an hour walk? Why don't you
Mm-hmm.
have coffee? Those things are so important to
Yep.
help givers to self-care because you don't want them to burn out and get sick.
Mm-hmm.
What we can do as a whole is so important.
Yes.
So, when should caregivers seek professional help for managing responsive behaviors?
Okay, great. So, like, of course, like we always try to do the personal, the non-pharmacological approach first, but we're not against seeking professional help. There are three things I think that warrant a caregiver seeking professional help. I think one is very first is when the behaviors that you are seeing are now posing a danger to the person and
Mhm.
to others, like the caregiver or others around them, right? So that's number one. Second, I think, is when you've tried everything, you've tried all the strategy, and the behaviors continue to continue to persist, they're becoming more frequent, the duration becomes longer. In short, it's really getting unmanageable. That's, one sign that you need to seek professional help. And also when the behaviors are significantly impacting not just the quality of life of the person with dementia, but also their caregiver, right? Yeah, so those are the three things. You don't have to wait for all of them to happen, but even just one of them, because that can trigger you, or that can give you a sign that you need to seek professional help.
Thank you. So, are there cultural or societal factors that may influence how responsive behaviors are perceived or managed?
Mm, I think so. Like, let's say, for example, cultural or societal stereotype where some people believe that dementia is still part of aging, right? Like they might just say, "Oh, like that's just part of the aging process. They're not going to address it," right? Or maybe another thing that I can think of is, let's say, some people may attribute it, for example, to something spiritual, right? They might say, oh, like maybe we're being punished, or maybe somewhat we did something
Wrong.
bad to aggravate the spirits, you know. And so, those things might stop people from seeking professional help, for example. Right. Other, societal beliefs or cultural beliefs may be, like for example, I come from the East, like I'm Asian. So like I don't know now, but when I was there, there's no nursing homes for people with dementia, because there's a thinking that, oh, it's the family responsibility. Like we are very collective, like the problem of one person is the problem of everyone, right?
Mhm.
And so that cultural norm, right, can eventually be a burden to the caregiver, right? Because they feel that if I ask a professional to care for my loved one with dementia, then I'm a bad bad daughter or bad relative, right? So those are just a few, cultural, societal beliefs that might affect the caregiving process.
Yeah, like yeah, I'm also, of course, from a marginalized community. So communities where culturally these things are not to be spoken about because
Mm-hmm.
of stigma. And even when your loved one is experiencing responsive behaviors, I know highly educated families where they don't want to let the doctor know, right? They don't want
Mm-hmm.
to talk about it because of fear of confinement or something. They
Yeah.
think, oh, they will just take them away, lock them up, but that is not true. And
Yeah.
also, maybe in cultures where if it's a parent being abusive to their children, it's culturally, well, accepted or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. And so people don't talk about it. There was something else I was thinking about that I forgot now. And also the fear of being judged,
Mm-hmm.
the stigma around, like you said, the collective care given back home cannot happen here because people work, right?
Mm-hmm.
People cannot, some families do manage really well where they work together. And of course, dementia itself causes discord and can,
Mm-hmm.
break families apart. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people don't want to don't want to have their loved one moved into facilities because of being judged, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or they hide it. They don't say why. It's like recently someone said, "Oh, just because I've been talking more about dementia, I found out that a family friend whose mom has been in a nursing home for so long, for several years, she was actually there because of dementia, but she never
Mm-hmm.
said anything about it. They thought it was just old age or something.
Mm-hmm.
Those cultural factors, and also it's like what I tell people about having your loved one moved into a home is when you can no longer properly manage, when your health is at risk, when
Mm-hmm.
that person is not getting enough stimulation. It's time to find a suitable home.
True.
We get proper care. And when
Mm-hmm.
you see your loved one flourishing in a nice home, it gives you peace, and then you can now start enjoying that loved one more, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those are things that are so important, and that is why it's so important for people to listen to podcasts such as this, where
Mm-hmm.
you have professionals or families that have lived through the experiences of caring for loved ones talk about what they have been through, right?
Yeah.
So my next question
another one that you have to think about, right? And so like there's now what we call robotic companions that you can use to provide interaction comfort for a person with dementia. And like lots, I think, like there's like telemedicine, telehealth that you can access, and you can also like some technologies can also help the individual, for example, like with providing meaningful activities like reminiscence, yeah, those are the technologies. I can't name like
Mhm,
specific
mhm,
technologies, and I believe that we can also endorse, but I'm sure that there's a lot in this age of AI, right? There's
mhm.
even AI monitoring systems that are
Yes.
being used like to help caregivers and to help with these responsive behaviors.
And as well, are there virtual reality or sensory therapies that can contribute to managing these conditions?
I think so. I think there's some virtual or sensory therapies that are now being used to manage behaviors. Like they are being used, for example, to engage the individual, to engage their senses. Some are being used, for example, to like offer meaningful experiences. I can't remember the name of the product, but I saw something like the person is put in front of a big monitor, or like there's a VR, and then they bike and then they can see their old neighborhoods, right? So that helps in exercise and also in reminiscence, right? So they
The
can use VR that way. It can also promote relaxation, especially when a person can like when the person is agitated or anxious, right? These VR technologies can be used to manage these behaviors.
And I just want to mention too that they don't have to be fancy. There are lots of sensory rooms that
Yeah.
are very expensive and stuff. Things like music. Then,
Mm-hmm.
there's something called fidget mats.
Mm-hmm.
That I don't know if it's worldwide, but I had some people deliver some. So it's just taking fabric and creating different types of sensory touches and putting bells and different things. Actually, this keep residents engaged for a long time. So there are so
Mm-hmm.
many things out there that you don't have to spend a lot of money. You can
Yep.
DIY it yourself, do it
Yes.
yourself. So, and anything that is relaxing. And this can also help to mitigate some of these behaviors. So, lastly, I want to ask you, what are some resources that are available to support caregivers? Because I mean, through your work as an Alzheimer's Society educator, and now that you're doing one-to-one coaching for caregivers in your new business. So, what are some of the resources that that you encourage caregivers to tap into?
Yeah, so even though I'm no longer working with the Alzheimer's societies, I still believe that they're a valuable resource in the community. They offer a lot of free services in terms of education, support, counseling for people with dementia and their caregivers and even the professionals. So I encourage them to look into their local Alzheimer's Society chapters, because who knows, there's a need that they can meet, right? And some Alzheimer's Society chapters also offer respite. They offer like daycare programs, so that's one. And like we also now live in an age where there's a lot of online platforms. So if you just like look at let's say free or low cost online courses on dementia, right? There's one from Australia. I forgot the name, but like that's a free resource that you can
Yes,
tap
caregiver. It's a
into.
caregiver network
It's a
from.
MOOC or something. I can't
Yes,
remember.
yes. I should be on that platform, but I don't remember what
Mm-hmm.
it's called. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. And
Lots of.
then support groups, right? You can like type support groups for family caregivers, right? I also remember, it just came into my mind because I used to be a facilitator of this course. It's not under the Alzheimer's Society, but there's one that's that's called Powerful Tools for Caregivers. That's also a powerful resource for me because it really emphasizes self-care for caregivers. So that's one resource that they can look into or tap into. And then there's there's lots of professionals. There's dementia care specialists, counselors, even doctors. You can speak with your loved one's doctor or your doctor if you need help, if you need support. Don't forget about them. They're important and valuable resource. Then look at respite care. It's another one. So there's day programs that you can look into, in-home care supports, nursing homes or long-term care facilities, or maybe even those short-term stays. They can be helpful. And as we talked about in the latter portion today, like there's technologies now. Like there's now apps that you can download, apps that that can advise you as to what to do when you're in this situation, right? There's VR. There's like a caregiver, I think in Ontario, if your listeners are in Ontario, there is an Ontario caregiver organization. I think they offer information, a lot of information for caregivers and helplines. Those are, some of the things that come to mind when I think of like resources for caregivers, even whether or not they're in line with responsive behaviors.
And there are books.
Yeah, and there are books, of course,
So
like
I
books, internet,
I have
like,
four children's books.
oh
Um,
yes, yes, yeah. I forgot
lots
about that. Like, yeah,
all
but
together,
books, yes,
that's
they will always be there, right? And now, like, we live in an age where there's ebooks too.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
ebooks and what do you
Mhm.
call these books now? The ones you listen to. So the
Audiobooks.
audiobooks, there are
Mm-hmm.
different types of resources really that, depending on what your needs are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like you've mentioned, quite a number of them. There are agencies, like apart from the Alzheimer's Society, societies, there are places like agencies like Eros for Grammar Wellness Hub that provides resources and support. There are, church, some churches
Mm-hmm.
are actually really good. Some
Yeah.
faith-based communities, they try to provide like senior programs. So
Mm-hmm.
just come out of your shell, reach out, ask questions, don't isolate, even
Yes.
though it's a disease that tend to keep you isolated. Reach out,
Mm-hmm.
take a phone call. There are lots of Zoom programs as well, and that
Yeah.
you can attend if you can't come out. But it's always good that you come out of your home, get some fresh air, go for a walk, invite
Mm-hmm.
friends to come and sit with your loved ones or families and so forth. So it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for coming back, Joanne. I look
You're
forward to
welcome,
again.
Christiana. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be part of your podcast again. So thank you for the invite.
You're welcome. Have a good rest of your week.
You too. Thanks.